Hey everyone, it's me Ryan, or I guess I should say the name of the channel, SReaperG. Last time we talked about Mass Effect Andromeda on this channel, I was very critical, but I also wanted to make sure I highlighted the positive parts of the game because to me, that's just as important if we want to have a nuanced discussion. I know trying to have a nuanced discussion here on the internet is probably doomed to fail, but that's all we're trying to do here on the channel. Think a little deeper, have conversations, and provoke some thought. Basically, what I'm trying to say is subscribe now for more content like this. In all seriousness, I wanted to touch on Andromeda in a more positive way here because for as much as I think Andromeda is kind of the weak link of the franchise, it does do a decent amount of stuff right, at least in the beginning. For example, I thought on release, and to this day, after replaying it this past year, Andromeda's opening moments were filled with promise and actually quite incredible. That's what I want to talk about today. I realize some of you may not agree with that or like this video, believing Mass Effect Andromeda to be a blight upon the Mass Effect name, and that's okay. I don't expect everyone to agree with me, but I hope you'll hear me out anyway and at least understand where I'm coming from. Also, if you notice stutters and weird stuff going on with the recorded footage, it's because my Elgato capture card seemingly was rejecting this game hardcore, just as we all did. I'll try to cut out those parts in the editing, the footage that looks a little wonky. So I watched the opening moments of this game again on a new playthrough, and I was kind of surprised by the production value. Lighting, animations, and even that sense of wonder the first few minutes or first few hours capture, it really, to be honest, doesn't last. Spoiler alert there, but we'll get into that a bit later. The game opens up similar to the original Mass Effect, narration followed by a very brief text prompt. Something about a bold new step and finding a new home. Everything looks good so far. Then we cut to the human arc 634 years later, having just arrived in the Andromeda Galaxy, and the player character Scott Ryder, or at least as I have affectionately named my new version of Ryder, Adam Driver Ryder, everyone kept asking him for autographs. It was really annoying. If you watched my previous Andromeda video, you know I'm not going to let that joke go, so you might as well just get over it now. Also make note of the lighting, textures, and the facial animations here. As I'm going to tell you right now, these are the best they're ever going to look throughout the whole game. I'm sure there's other moments where they look half decent here and there, but I would also tell you to consult Cora's romance cutscene here, where I'm absolutely convinced to this day that half the game's budget was spent on the animation there alone. It continues with some pretty well lit and highly detailed cinematic moments, and it really did grab me. There is the generic Asari Andromeda face model that will become distracting later as you meet more Asari, but again, so far so good. If that's the worst that we got so far, I think we're doing pretty well. A lot of people, myself included, cite one of the reasons that the original Mass Effect has stood the test of time despite some of its gameplay jank, which is obviously arguable depending on how you tolerate that kind of stuff, was its storytelling, characters, relative innocence in relation to the other games in the trilogy, and that sense of exploration and discovery. I do believe so far that that sense of discovery and exploration is captured here in the first few moments of Andromeda. We're thrust into this new galaxy, this new unknown galaxy with the promise of finding a new home for the various races of the Milky Way. The Pathfinder is tasked with finding these quote-unquote golden worlds, ready to just settle down and start colonizing. A welcome video plays in the background and explains exactly what the whole point of the Andromeda initiative is, which I rather enjoyed as a subtle guide. It's giving you the context you need to understand what is going on without someone just telling you straight up or directly explaining it to you. Think parents explaining sex to their kids. You see, when a mommy and daddy love each other very much, they gather about 20,000 of their friends and family to travel to a new galaxy to make their new home. It also would stand to reason that any agency or government organizing such an initiative would probably want it to be peppered with glowing praise and PR pizzazz. Plus, it gives the player enough intrigue to want to continue without smacking them in the face with information. Really quick, this doesn't have to do with the introduction of the game, but I got a bone here to pick with old Liam. Now let me zoom in here real quick. There we go. Something I started noticing on this recent playthrough is how unorganized this initiative is. The same initiative that let Liam smuggle this dirty ass couch without my fucking permission onto the ship. He never asks me what I think of it, and if he did, I would tell him to reupholster that shit or I'm spacing it. Give me any lip, Liam, and I'll space you too. Sorry, I apologize to all the Liam stands out there. I got a bit carried away. You meet Sam, who at the time you believe is just your ship computer that has been implanted in you to be a kind of virtual guide for you and the crew. Think Edie from the Mass Effect trilogy. Despite having a calm and soothing voice, Sam is your guide, and it's pretty typical for games to have that kind of disembodied outside voice that does the menial BS nobody wants to be bothered with. So far, we're still pretty good, though we will start noticing some small cracks in the presentation that aren't necessarily game-breaking or that egregious, but it definitely doesn't get any better. The ship hits some dark energy clouds and has a momentary short in power. Cora comes in to save the day. Yay, Cora! The Pathfinder calls for you and your sister and Cora to report to the bridge immediately. Well, bang, okay? No? Oh, okay, sorry. Only there was an issue with your sister's pod. I'm coming, Sarah. What's the word, Doc? Is she dead? No, she's fine. Here's the thing. Even with the dialogue here, Nobody's doing anything jank or stiff, at least with the animations just yet. So far, it feels very natural and cinematic. The way Adam Driver gets the information on his sister, and Lexi tells you what's going on and tells Adam Driver, sis will be fine. And even though presentation-wise it's not up to par with the last few scenes of dialogue and cinematics, it's still pretty natural and looks pretty consistent even if you do notice the difference. Even the way Korra just subtly tilts her head as she moves, it all is fairly consistent so far. This small part here where the arc almost explodes due to some systems failing, I don't know why it was included or what it really contributes, but I could point out how these two people here don't seem to be doing diddly squat, but here I am being nitpicky, so let's move on. We meet Ryder Sr., and he argues with the captain about proceeding to the Golden World. Again, note how everything looks highly detailed still and the animations are smooth, and the mystery of an energy cloud that is scrambling the systems does have the player continuing to wonder, and it made me want to press onward, especially now that we have our sights on our Golden World, Habitat 7. This part does give me some Eden Prime vibes from the original Mass Effect, touching down on an unknown world with little to no way of knowing what's down there, even if in Eden Prime's case it was colonized already or being colonized. Again, nitpicks aside, so far I am enjoying the game the way it opens in terms of drip feeding you information and establishing the character dynamics. You're now getting suited up to drop down on the planet, and seeing yourself and Korra getting suited up, or in the process at least, is a small detail I appreciate. It may not be necessary, but I think small moments like this can give you a glimpse into what the characters are like when they're getting ready for missions and the conversations that they have. You also get a chance to meet some of the other Pathfinder crew, and all this does is build the characters and give you their thinking about what's going on. I wish there was more choice in these moments of dialogue, of course, and they would allow you to more define early on who your character is, but it's only the opening moments of the game, right? It can't possibly get worse, can it? Well, it doesn't, but it doesn't get much better. There are some conversations with Korra where you can define yourself a bit, however. Are you concerned about the unknown? Excited for the adventure? Just doing your job? Andromeda does spend a bit more time than the other Mass Effect games on its opening moments, having you understand the circumstances, what is going on, and look, I'm not saying that to defend the writing in Andromeda. It does go without saying that the trilogy has exponentially better storytelling and writing, but as I have said a few times, nothing so far about the introduction to Andromeda has been egregiously bad or even questionable to me. I even rather enjoy this brief interaction with Ryder Sr. because it speaks loads about the dynamic between him and your character and sibling. He speaks to you matter-of-factly, doesn't sound particularly warm, but you can tell in his own way he does care. Again, all well done so far, and I'm still kind of invested at this point. Ryder Sr. gives a speech, and we're on our way. Thus far, I have been pretty positive on the opening moments of Andromeda. It's actually pretty well done. Now, I'm not saying this as a replacement for any of the rest of the game's shortcomings, but more to explain the way the game pulls you in the beginning with some really well done set pieces and visual design, and just enough intrigue and unknowns to make you want to explore further. So let's continue. You enter the atmosphere of the planet in what is a relatively cinematic sequence despite you having control of the camera. Advanced technology in the distance and floating rocks, all stuff we've seen before in Mass Effect. Well, maybe not exactly floating rocks we've seen before, but again, so far we're chugging along. Their shuttle crashes and Ryder and Liam fall to the planet's surface. This here is an eye-catching visual worthy of screenshotting, so I think I will. Oh, this one also. As you move through the world, there's lightning strikes and floating objects, and I'm reminded of the first time I played the game back in 2017. Everything thus far has been good, if nothing else, and there's this sense of wonder, again, and confusion that's pretty thrilling as you continue. A lot of people cite Andromeda as having fun gameplay despite everything else wrong with it, and while I think the gameplay is fine, I still always prefer Mass Effect 3's gameplay because I feel the jumping and dashing creates some of these really clunky scenarios and weird platforming sections that are okay, and then there's soft cover, which I am personally not a fan of. Soft cover, of course, being when the player automatically goes into cover when behind a surface and not with a button press. Something that Mass Effect 2 and 3 had, and it makes going into cover much simpler and easier. Basically, I'm not in love with the gameplay on Andromeda, but that's a topic for another video or another discussion. I think this is the first time I started to notice that the way the game opens up and all the smooth animations and scenes don't stay consistent throughout, as moving around the way I described with the jumping and dashing does make for more verticality and complex level design, but it also feels a bit clunky. You begin to see all the lighting feel a bit more static than it just was, and some blurry rock textures. And yeah, we are talking about gameplay versus what has been up until now, mostly cinematics and dialogue, but regardless. Last time I pointed out blurry rock textures in a game, someone commented and told me that not everything needs to be rendered in 4K Ultra HD at all times, and I will say, yeah, like obviously. It doesn't bother me per se, I'm not angered by it, but it goes to show the relative quality of the game, especially with Andromeda being relatively inconsistent. We're introduced to the antagonists of the game, or one of them, the Ket. They always just kind of looked like roided out collectors to me, but hey, they're gonna kill our boy Fisher, so I put them down real quick. And then I started noticing the dialogue is a bit weird sometimes, and I can't really explain it beyond showing you some of it here.
No vital signs. Just shot him in cold blood.
He was trying to surrender. Why kill him?
Would we treat them any different if they showed up on Earth, armed to the teeth?
And even then, I can't explain to you too well what exactly I find off about it, but as we continue, there's more cracks that kind of break through the presentation. Even if it doesn't completely show until after this, you can look around a bit if you want to and explore, but to be honest, there's not much interesting going on unless you are just discovering the game on to explore every nook and cranny. You encounter the first examples of the Remnant enemies and Remnant tech that you'll fight and discover throughout the game, and some containers with some random shit in it. You find Korra and the rest of the Pathfinder team, you fight off some cat, and Liam goes apeshit because he's pissed off. You see a very underwhelming scene that Korra is a biotic, and it's not contagious, in case you didn't know that already.
I didn't know you were biotic.
Don't worry, it's not contagious.
Your daddy contacts you and tells you he has an idea to stop the extreme weather so they can get out of there, and you say, "Okay, dude, whatever you say," and go towards his location. We meet up with Daddy Dearest and we take down some Ket, infiltrate the Remnant Tower to shut it down, and clear up the storm. Another thing I want to point out here is that this leads to a short section where you fight off the Ket, and again, the gameplay is fine. But again, where we see some cracks in the armor here is that the squad commands are surprisingly limited when compared to the previous entries. And by limited, I mean it feels kind of restricted and results in your squad just having minds of their own in combat and barely listening to you even when you do tell them to get into cover to go to a certain spot. I know the problem here with this game is that there was a lot of issues implementing a lot of the game mechanics into the Frostbite engine, which you can probably trace back even further to Inquisition, and while ultimately this does explain a lot of the weird issues Andromeda has throughout, it doesn't excuse them either. Gameplay aside, you get blasted away after Dad interacts with the Remnant device, and with that your helmet shatters. He then takes his off and gives it to you, saving your life, but kills him in the process. It's a very harrowing scene, but the impact of the death is lost on me a bit, since as the player we are barely given much time to understand him or even feel a connection at all with him. And even then, after this brief scene where they tell you of your father's death, there's not much else to it. Yeah, it does come up throughout the game, but it feels like it should have had more of an impact on me or on the events in the immediate aftermath of it happening at least. This is where the opening of the game's whole facade fades and we go from dense and layered plotting to quick snippets of info before being forced forward into more of the story. I'm not a game writer or a writer beyond my videos and some other stuff I do on the side, but it does feel like we're moving at such a brisk pace at this point that there's not a lot of time to just ask questions or explore or just walk around and think. The game does open up in a bit, and to be honest, it's not always like that all the way around, but what it does tell you, what it tells me, is that this game is just relatively inconsistent overall. I do like Mass Effect Andromeda, which I suspect is not a popular position to have, but despite its flaws and shortcomings, the main thing I am trying to identify here is how well presented the opening of the game is, and then how it quickly just falls by the wayside and how inconsistent throughout the quality of the game is. And sure, it's probably a bit unfair to compare the visuals to the trilogy now, but considering that the Legendary Edition just came out and all of the games look better than ever and they are showcased in beautiful 4K, I loaded up Mass Effect 2, I should say, the original Mass Effect 2 on PC months and months ago, and I remember thinking that this game still looked great, and I was playing it in 1080p, which I assume Andromeda runs at as well. But then when I loaded up my old save on Andromeda, I remember thinking, this does not look good, it did not age well at all. Still, maybe that's not a fair comparison to make, or at least it's a difference in the engine quality from Unreal Engine to Frostbite, but still, remember what I said earlier? These are really the best the facial animations, lighting, and textures are ever going to look throughout the whole game. Seriously, that is the best that they're going to look. The more I played Andromeda in this playthrough, the more I realized that nothing ever came quite close to how the game opens up, or how it looks and how it's presented. It's very well done. And even if it doesn't match the same heights as the trilogy before it, it's a lot of promise that is thrown by the wayside rather quickly. And I do believe a fair critique of Andromeda is its content, as the content of the trilogy did not change in the Legendary Edition. So I can say with certainty, nothing in Andromeda for me quite reaches that same level of quality, even as much as I do like Andromeda and I don't mind its existence. Also, this can be seen as an example of how the introduction to a game can be great and then lose steam pretty quickly if it doesn't keep up with the same level of quality and writing. Front loading, if you will. Of course, at launch there were a lot of technical issues and hiccups that crop up in Andromeda, and that can possibly be attributed to EA forcing BioWare to develop on the Frostbite engine, an engine that is not friendly to the type of RPGs BioWare makes, because again, if you go back to the Mass Effect trilogy, Legendary Edition or not, the gameplay, at least in 2 and 3 in my opinion, holds up amazingly well, as does some of the dialogue and animations. Anyway guys, that is all I have to say about Mass Effect Andromeda's opening moments, and why I think it's a bit misleading to the full quality of the game, which is inconsistent overall. But now I toss the discussion to you. Am I right about Andromeda's opening moments? Am I wrong, crazy, completely off base? You tell me. If you like the video, consider giving the video a thumbs up, but if you didn't, give it a thumbs down. Subscribe if you like the content, and as always, thanks for watching. I'll talk to you all soon, and I love you all. Maybe.